Tonight, we are talking about the DOM and events. This is exciting stuff because now this is where you learn how to use JavaScript together with the browser to make pages interactive for your user. So we'll do announcements real quick, and then lecture, and then studio review. So classic format tonight. Reminder that graded assignment number 4, HTML me something, is due on Monday. Again, nothing fancy. This is just a basic web page. Most of you probably already have it done or are close to it because it's super fun and easy. There's no class on Thanksgiving, of course. And I just want to say, if you are at this point, because a lot of people are, especially after Mars Rover, super overwhelmed, maybe falling behind, stressed out about the pace of this class, and because it's hard to keep up. So yeah, I just want to encourage you, don't isolate yourself, because that can be easy to do, to just kind of go quiet and just be like, I just have to figure this out. That's actually the worst thing you can do, because the support of your peers and your TAs, it makes a huge difference. So stay in communication. I remember as a TA that one of the students that I worried about the most were the ones that I didn't hear from. And I would reach out to them and they weren't writing me back. And I just was like, I don't know, they're not turning their stuff in. I don't know what's going on. We are here to help you, like your TAs, your peers. Sarah, the student success coach, they are fantastic. If you're really deeply struggling and need some guidance, reach out to them. So I just wanted to make sure to say that real fast, because I know we get into this and we go straight to the technical stuff, but I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that this is a community, and we really want everyone to feel supported as much as possible, because we know this is hard and you've got real life going on and it's just overwhelming. So yeah, so definitely, reach out and just be honest. There is no judgment here about anything. So just, be honest with your TAs. If you are fallen enough behind that you need to work out some sort of like a catch-up plan, that's where you talk to Clark, and definitely let him know if you want to, formalize that, because Clark is great at coming up with an they actually have a format for it, like a document, and they'll come up with a plan and help you kind of figure out how you're going to spend your time to get back on track. Okay. Now let's go to the lecture. How to make your page interactive. So we'll talk about using JavaScript in the browser. And then the document object model, that's what DOM stands for. When we say the DOM, that's what we mean. How to access DOM information with JavaScript, how to change values on the page in the DOM, what events are and how you can handle them, and then how you kind of put it all together and organize your code. And I have lots of live examples, but I have quite a lot of slides too. So we will, just kind of work through it one thing at a time. All right, so using JavaScript in the browser. JavaScript was originally created back in the mid-90s to run in a browser. It's the purpose that it was created for. Those of us who are old enough to remember Netscape Navigator, those are the guys who created JavaScript. Because they needed a way to actually provide validation for user input that was client side and not server side, because you have to remember, these are the days of dial-up, right? It took forever to send information back and forth. And so trying to validate something on the back end and keep that, it was not viable. So they came up with JavaScript to run in the browser. So it is at home when it isn't running in the browser. And even though it does lots of other things today, that is not the, this is actually its original purpose. So everything will, kind of work very, very naturally. The browser dev tools have a console for viewing the information that you log and any errors that might come up. So we're going to make lots of use of that. Okay, so you can actually have internal script putting it into your HTML file as long as you enclose it in a script tag. And you can put it at the end of the body content if you need to interact with elements that are part of the body. Otherwise, it's okay just to put it up in the head. However, if you are working with a separate file, which is often called script.js, if you just have one main one, in that case, you would link to the file using the script tag and just say source equals script.js or whatever the name of the file is. And you can put that in the head or the body content. It doesn't matter. It'll work either way, typically speaking. Okay, so the document object model. This is where you have to kind of envision this, and I'm going to try to help you do this. So every single element in an HTML file can be represented by a JavaScript object. And you know all about JavaScript objects. You've gotten very familiar with them after, some of the things that you've done, like especially Scrabble Scorer, right? And Mars Rover and a lot of the exercises you've done. So it's really that simple. So a document object contains all of the information available about the element it represents. It can hold the content if it's got any nested text or maybe even a bunch of other HTML that's nested inside. It's styling, which may have been applied from style. And actually, I'm gonna clarify this. It does not actually. I probably shouldn't have said it this way. I will fix this on the slide. It doesn't contain information, like you can't access the information about the styles unless they were done inline. It can't actually access the CSS file. You'll see that from my little diagram up here, right? But I'll go into more detail about that in just a second. And then there's a lot of other information, and I mean a lot. We're going to look at this object, like the main document object in a minute, and you'll see what I mean. And for every single element that you create an object for, there's going to be a lot of information. So you can read from and update the HTML in the browser with JavaScript. You can go find out what the values are, and you can actually change the values. That's what we're going to learn how to do. The JavaScript file does not interact with the CSS file directly, which means that any changes are going to be applied in line. And once they are in line, that's when it can read the values. Otherwise, it's just going to come up with a big blank if you try to access the style of something that was only declared in the CSS file, but not put in line. Now, that's actually normal. Typically speaking, you're more interested in changing things on the page than you are assigning things initially. If you're reading things initially, but every once in a while it comes up where you might want to go get the style of something before you change it for some reason. And that's when you just need to understand the difference. If it's not declared in line to begin with, you're not going to be able to find the value yet. Okay, but we'll practice this. So you can represent HTML elements with JavaScript objects. And it pretty much translates this way. An HTML attribute, like in this example here, ID or style, those become object properties. And so even though HTML attributes and CSS properties are lowercase hyphenated, typically, the corresponding object properties are camel case, like you normally would with JavaScript. So I've got a rogue underline there, but I'll show you what I mean in a second. And then there's additional special DOM properties and methods that are going to allow interaction, like inner HTML, which refers to any HTML or text that is in between those tags. So in this example, you see, we've got these attributes, ID and style, and the CSS property font size. And then down here, we've got all the object properties that are derived from those. So ID and style are, immediately, and inner HTML is added into that. And then, of course, in the style object, there's another property, font size, and that's what I'm talking about. You can see how font size in CSS is hyphenated, but when you are working with it in a JavaScript object, then it's camel case. So you can think about some of the common ones you might use: background color, text or font size, font family, font weight, things like that. It's all going to be just camel case at that point. Okay. And we are, I promise, going to look at some real code here in a second. But I want to talk about two variables that are already available to you that you can access information from in the DOM. One is the window object, and that's information about the page, like the browser's information about the page. So you can just log it and see the object and its properties. And some of the helpful properties that you might be able to see would be like, window.location.pathname or .href. And those give you information about, exactly what your file path is. And sometimes that can be really useful for like saying, if I'm on this page or this page, do this, but if I'm not, do something else. I've done that actually on my own website, which I built completely with vanilla JavaScript for my portfolio. I do a lot of that actually. And then there's things like, inner height, inner width, and there's a bunch of things related to that. And like, scrolling and all, there's tons of properties that can be really useful when you're trying to do things based on the browser window itself, its dimensions, what the user is actually doing at the time with where the mouse is on the page. I mean, stuff like that. Then there's the document object, and this is like actual document. I mean, I'll use the term document object loosely to describe like any object in the DOM that you might create that is based on an element, but the actual document object is a real thing that represents all of the HTML on the page, the entire body. So you can just console log the document to view the HTML itself. And then there's this other method of the console API called dir, console.dir or dir. That would allow you to view the actual object representation of the HTML. And that's important because that's where you're actually going to be able to see all those properties. So I want to go over and do that. Let's talk about some of these though. Yeah, helpful properties of the document can be like the title or the body. But that's as far as that. I mean, and then you can continue to go off of the body from there if you want to, but typically if you're going to do that, you're going to start finding other ways to identify those elements, and we'll look at that in just a minute. So right now I want to switch over to this example, and I'm going to spin this up with live server, and it's opening on my other screen, so let me move it. Okay. So this is, welcome to my site, and let me get this open. All right. And I've got some stuff logged there. We'll talk about that in a second. But what I'm interested in doing right now, so here's the HTML, and here's the style. I just have applied the color red to some text, the intro, ID that we were looking at. And then I've got some things that we're going to do here. So the first thing we'll do is actually do, like I suggested, and console log the window object, and we'll go take a look at that. Okay, so here it is. And you can see there are a lot of properties, right? I mean, so much stuff. And most of them I'm not using. This is a very simple file. And you can actually even get to document from there, the document object. But you can get to lots of other things. There's that inner height I was talking about, 982, inner width, 1077. And yeah, lots of different events. We'll get to talking about those. Scrolling information, the screen, information itself, session storage and local storage are things you might use professionally, or even like maybe in liftoff with your project, where you can like actually kind of cache things, data as the user is interacting with your page, and then keep using it. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in here, most of which you won't use now, but it's there. I just want to make you aware of that. So that's window. Now let's do document. So first, like I said, if you console log document, and notice, I mean, these are just available, right? The browser just makes them available. They're not declared anywhere. Then we can come and we can look, and all that's going to do, console logging it, is going to give you the HTML. It's just, spitting out exactly what you see over here in the element inspector. So that may or may not be helpful to you. Sometimes it is. But if you are more interested in the object itself to view all of its properties, that's where you use console.dir. And oops, well, that works too, but I really just want to do this. Okay. Document. So let's go look at that. So now we can see this is, similar to the way that it's doing it here. And it's, it got everything's expandable and collapsible, which is really helpful. But you can see there's the body, has lots of information about the body. This idea of children, it just basically means all of the elements that are nested inside. When you're doing end-to-end testing and unit testing of web stuff. You'll have to work with that a lot with child nodes and things like that. Forms, if you have forms, there's information about that, images, links. So there's a ton of things you can get information on about the entire document. So occasionally that comes in handy. Oh, and I guess we could look at title, because that's one that I know I definitely use. Yeah. Right now, my title is just called document because I didn't change it. If I want to change it, I can come over here and actually, make it, intro example or something like that. And if we come back over here and it reloads and we come back down, you can see, title is intro example. So there it is. Those are the kind of big, native objects that have all that information from the browser for you to work with. You can do some really sophisticated stuff. Okay, so let's go back to the slides here for a second. And let's talk about accessing other elements, like specific elements. So you can represent any element with JavaScript. You want to store it in a variable using let or const. I prefer const, just because it makes sure that you can't accidentally overwrite. It's very easy, depending on how you name things, to suddenly start getting confused when you're talking about values versus the objects that are representing elements on the page. And so const is a great way to prevent accidentally overwriting that with another variable that might be similarly named. And then you have to kind of start using things like num value as opposed to, num div or something, whatever it is. Okay. If an element has an ID, you can simply use the method get element by ID, and then just put in the ID name in quotes. But you can also use query selector, and that works for all selector types. So if you have an ID, you would just make sure you put the hashtag in there so that it knows that you're talking about an ID. If you're using a class, you would make sure to put the dot in there so it knows you're talking about a class. And if it's a selector, of course, or an element selector, you would just put P or div or whatever. But here's the thing, it only finds the very first one. So if you have multiple classes or multiple of the same element selector in your file, it's only going to return the first one. If you need to get a list of all of the matching elements that are in a class or in a that are part of an element group, you can actually use query selector all. There's also a version of this with get element called get elements by class name that'll do the same thing, but that's specifically for classes, obviously. So this example here, you can see that I've got our previous object intro, and I can come back over here and we can look at this again if you want. So it has an ID intro, style of font size 14, and testing 123 is the text that's in between the tags. So intro.inner HTML is going to be what? Somebody just call it out.
Would it be testing 123?
Yeah, exactly. And intro.style.font size?
14
pixels, actually, technically, yeah. And these are important things to understand because these are things you're going to work with the most, probably the inner HTML and the style. And there's a couple things that are easy to forget. And one is you can't just use intro because that represents the entire object. You have to, put on specifically what property, which of course corresponds to the element of the attribute. In the case of like style or ID or whatever. And then of course with style properties, then you have to say the CSS property, tag that on to the style property. And then, you're working with those values and it's going to be exactly what it is, per the CSS. So we will talk about in a little bit about how you might sort that out if you're actually working with numbers and text separately. Ian, you got a question?
Are element IDs always in question marks? Are they always strings?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
They're always stored as strings, yes. Okay, and again, we set the color of this using the CSS file that was external, right? So we can't actually read intro.style.color right now. It's not coming back. So if we come over here to our file and go back to the script, you can see right now that I have created this variable. Intro is document.getElement by ID. So I'm going to the entire document and I'm using getElement by ID to look up the ID intro. And then it'll go to the HTML file and look and find whichever one has the ID intro. And it says, whoop, that's the one you're talking about. So that P element right there is now the element that is represented by this object that I've called intro. And so then I can, go and look into its properties. So I console log intro.enterHTML and intro.style.font size. And you can see in the DevTools here that I get testing 1, 2, 3, and I get 14 pixels. But I also try to console log intro.style.color, and maybe I'm expecting to see red or the code for red, depending on how it's been stored. In this case, it would have been red, but because I actually used the word. But oops, wrong one. But you can see it's just blank. There's nothing there because it can't access it because it wasn't inline. Whereas if I actually come in and let's maybe say that I add another property here. Oops, I'm in the wrong index file. Okay. Let's go to here and let me put a semicolon. Oh, wow. Let me unselect all of that. Okay, let me put a semicolon here and let's give it a font, weight of bold. So that it's, now you can see over here, it's bolder now. And then if I go and I actually try to access that in the script file, intro.style.font weight, camel case. Now, if we come back and it's reloaded, then you can see bold right there. You just still don't see color. Okay, so that's how simple it is to create an object and access that object that represents that element, and then work with its properties. So far, we've just logged them, right? We're not changing any values. Let's talk about how to do that. All right, you want to update the page and change the value of something. You can access the inner HTML property to add or update an element's content. And this can just be text. It can be entire blocks of nested HTML. I'm only going to demonstrate adding text tonight. We will have plenty of opportunities to demonstrate adding blocks of HTML, especially in a week and a half when we talk about fetching JSON from an API and getting data from somebody else and then displaying it on your page. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for doing that. So we'll keep it simple tonight and just work with text. So you can access the style property to add or update an element styling. And you can access the class list property to add or remove classes. And this can be incredibly useful if you have a certain style that you want to change, and maybe there's several things about it that you want to change, and you can establish that in your CSS file, and then go and just add or remove all of those values from some object all at once. There's times when that's super useful. I'll show you an example of that later towards the end of lecture. So let's go back and over here and let's do this. So we're going to change the value of this. So I'm directly just going to say I want intro.enterHTML to be, ready to go. And let's go look at it. And there we go. We see that it's ready to go. But let's say we don't want it to be red anymore. We want it to be green. Just because I couldn't read the red doesn't mean I can't change the color. So I'm going to go and I'm going to change it. And I'm going to say green. And so we see that it updates it. It says ready to go and it says green, or it is green. And if we come over here in the elements, you can see right here that it's actually added it now in line. So once you change the value, it does put it there. And it is now in line in the browser's copy. Now, obviously, this is not overwriting your original HTML file. This is the browser's copy of your HTML, and it's modifying it however you tell it to. So we could do that. And then I think I had something else on the slide. What else did I do? Oh yeah, the font size. I mean, that's not hugely important, but sure, why not? Okay, style dot font size, and let's change it. And instead of 14 pixels, let's go with 12 points. Points being a common way to declare the size of fonts, perfectly legal. Okay, and then we come over here and the size has changed. And so, you know, we can go back in and you can see that too, that the font size is now 12 points instead of 14 pixels. So let's go over here and actually console log these again, and we'll do the ones that we changed. Oh, I was actually going to do the weight here. Make it bold and italicized. Okay, let's do the italicized part. And I'll just move this down here. Boom. Okay. Except for, oh, that was console logging it. My bad. That's not what I meant to move. I'll take that off because I actually put it in the HTML, didn't I? Guys, I'm not following my own example. Okay, let's just do the italics then. So we will say intro.style, and we will say font style equals italic. All right, and now when we come over here, it's in italics, and we can verify by seeing here that it has added font style italic to the inline CSS. And if we log it, so I will do font weight and font style. And then I also want to do color, right? Because we said that we couldn't access it before, but now that it's been put in line because I changed the color, we should be able to see it, and it's going to say green, and there it is. There's all those properties. And that was what I meant to do down here. And then the other thing I wanted to do was to demonstrate what happens when you log just the entire object, right? And remember that I said if you use console.log, you're just going to see the HTML, right? If you want to see all the properties, that's where you have to use that console.dir. So we can do that too. Okay. And now we have it right here, and here's all of its properties, but you can see that, let's see, I have to kind of, you know, yeah, inner HTML is ready to go. Inner text is ready to go. Now, the difference between inner HTML and inner text is exactly what you think it is. If we had nested HTML inside of this, then these values would be different, and this would show like all of the nested HTML. But because I only have text between these tags, they're the same. But so you can use inner HTML to access just text as well. Okay, let's see. And then I guess we could get down to style, and this is where you can see all these properties, right? Font size, font weight, color. So these are the available properties that it now has placed in line that we can read. So yeah, so that's the whole object. So sometimes you might be curious about, you know, what kind of information can I get about this object? This is how you do it, console.dir. Okay, so that's it for that example. Let's come here. I want to talk about events. Events is where it gets really interesting. So if you want to make your page interactive, that means that it's no longer going to be static. You're actually going to make your page dynamic so that it can be interacted with. And every time a user interacts with your page, events are triggered. And it can be as simple as them just moving the mouse around, or it can be, you know, clicking or double clicking, or, you know, pressing certain keys or things. But you can capture and handle these events as they fire in the browser, and then respond to them with code that changes something, and then that kind of gives your user an interactive experience. Okay, this is a very long list. You won't use most of these right away, but I kind of wanted to have a list of the most common types of events. Mostly, you're going to work with things like click for the time being, but there are all these other ones. I'll show you examples of some of them in a second. And then there's some keyboard events. There's window events. Load is one that you're definitely going to be using so that you can make sure that your code doesn't run until the browser is saying that the page is ready for it. And then form events, we're actually going to talk about forms on Monday. And so we'll kind of get into some of these events, not all of them. But submit, input, change, those are some of the most common ones. Okay, I want to show you some examples of things before I move too much further. Oh, I forgot about this one. I was going to show you this earlier. So this one, let me get that up a little bit so you can see it. You're not going to be able to read this tiny text probably, but that's okay because I'm going to talk about it. I have this exercise. These are all, by the way, in the DOM section of my practice exercises. So all three of these I'm going to show you, but you can actually get into the code. You can look at the demos if you want. But this one is intended to kind of show you how these work. So get element by ID. In this case, it's going, I've given that particular red box that you see over there on the right has an ID called specific box. And when I hover over this, it's activating that. And you can kind of see, okay, get element by ID identifies exactly one thing. Get elements by class name. You can get several things in a class. So those all have the class column 3. These have the class box. So it gets, everything if it has the same class. Query selector, here's querying by tag. So this is an H3 that I've got right here. And you can see that it changes the font and the color when I hover over it. Querying all by tag is where it actually goes and gets both of the H3s here and here, not just the first one. And query by ID, I have nabbed that center box there. And also query all by class is query selector all, and then give it a class name. And then all of those have the class row 0. So this is just a quick way to kind of demonstrate all the different ways that you can identify the elements on the page and then make changes to them. And then this one is to demonstrate simple events. So click events. I can click on any of these and it's going to change things about this box. So right now, I'm going to refresh this and get it back to where, yeah, here's a simple box. Nothing special about it, black border, whatever. I can change the color of the border, red, yellow, and blue. I can change the thickness, 4 pixels, 8 pixels, 12 pixels. And then I can, of course, go back and forth, change the color. And then I've also got the style of the border. Here it is dotted at 12 pixels. Here's dotted at 4 pixels. Here's double blue at 12 pixels. And here's dashed at 8 pixels and red. So this is kind of just as simple as it gets. You click on something, it makes something happen on the page. You'll get lots of practice with that tonight, especially in Studio. Okay. So other DOM events, there's click, right? We just covered that one, but there's also double click. You can make something to where it won't happen unless it's double clicked. You can also do mouse over and mouse out. So I pass over and then go off, and it changes the color once I cross into it. And then once I cross off, it takes it away again. And then this one actually is, I'm hovering over this one, but it's changing both of them. And the point I kind of want to bring up here is you guys might have, if you've delved into CSS at all, you may have gotten into the pseudo selector thing where you can actually do like, colon, hover after something in your CSS, and it'll give you a way to style something when the mouse hovers over it. That's a very common way to style something for changes when you hover is, you don't bother with JavaScript, you just use the pseudo selector in CSS. But if you wanted to actually do something where it affects not just this one, but this one as well, JavaScript is a very easy way to do that. Mouse down and mouse up. So I hold it down and then I release. Those are a little bit different because they're not about like completing a click. Essentially what a click is the combination of these two things, both mouse down and mouse up. And once that is complete, then it does whatever you want it to. But if you want to go halfway, you can use mouse down and mouse up. And then this is fun. You can have a little canvas and do mouse move and track the mouse around and draw, on the screen. So there's some examples, super simple examples of, different events that you can capture and then run code that makes a change on your page once you have detected those events in the browser. Okay, let's get back over here. All right. So let's talk about the sequence of events so that you understand what's happening between the browser and your code. First, the user triggers an event. They do something. Like I said, they move their mouse, they click, they do something. Your script detects that, and we'll talk about how to do that in a second, and executes some sort of function, and then updates the HTML with the content and or styling changes. Or maybe, if you're testing it out, you're just like logging something to the console. Maybe it's not even updating the page, but most of the time you're doing something that's going to update the page. And then the page is re-rendered by the browser to reflect those changes. And of course, all this happens in a split second, right? But this is the sequence. So we can kind of look at this, this diagram over here. You've got the page, the user does something on the page, the JavaScript detects it, and sends, runs some sort of code that then sends changes to the HTML, and then the browser re-renders the page to reflect the new version of the HTML. Okay, so for inline event handling, you can do something as simple as just handle it directly in the tag, as long as the script is also internal. So you can kind of see in this example, I've declared a function within the script element up here that I've put in the head. Handle click is what I've called the function. And then I just got this console log. I clicked the button. And then down here, you actually add an attribute. And if it's a click event, you just say on click. If it's a mouse over event, you'd say on mouse over. Whatever that is, just put on the front. And that will become the attribute that you can use to then call the function. And if any of you have ever worked with, or if you've seen examples online where they're working with a framework like Angular or something like React, you might see where they actually just reference the function because it's a slightly different syntax. That's not the case with vanilla JavaScript. When you're just doing JavaScript, you have to actually call it. So you want to make sure those parentheses are on there. So it depends on what framework you're using and what syntax it is, whether you would be referencing or calling. So just keep that in mind. You need to actually call it from here if you're going to do it this way. Mostly we are going to do it a different way, but I wanted to make sure that you understand that it can work this way. But when you have very complex code and you want to do a whole bunch of stuff, you're probably not going to have the luxury of being able to put that in a script tag in the HTML page. It would get too cumbersome really fast. Most of the time, you're going to have a separate JavaScript file, and then you need to be able to detect the events a different way. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Event listeners. So event handling, which is where you just capture that event and then do something with it and respond, can be done with event listeners in your JavaScript. So instead of using an attribute in the tag, you don't need to put anything at the tag at all. And you can just listen for the event as long as it knows which element you're listening for. And you can access the object first, make sure you know what it's going to be that you want to listen for. And then you just attach this method, add event listener, to that object. And then you tell it what code to execute. So you can see in this example here, I've got, num button, and I've gone and looked for some sort of element that has the ID num button within the document. And so now I have an object and I can attach the method, add event listener. And then I tell it it's a click event and I give it a function to tell it what to do. Let's talk about that syntax in a little bit closer detail. All right. So add event listener takes 2 arguments. The first one is a string with a specific event type. If it's a click event, it's just click, right? If it's an input event, it's just input. If it's mouse over, it's just mouse over. But it's a string. And then the function is you actually pass a function into, and you can have it as a named function if you want to, and then just reference it. But you also can just do it as an anonymous function. This is very common. And it's the way I'll be demonstrating it tonight, to do it as an anonymous function. And either way, the code that's inside the function is what gets executed when the event is detected. So again, here's the same example, num button. So here's the object that I've created, and I'm taking that object and I'm adding the DOM method add event listener. And then I'm giving it two arguments. The first one is the event name. And then the second one after the comma there is this function. And so you can see that the function, it's anonymous. It just has, the parentheses, and it's got its brackets for the body of the function. And then after that, on this last line down here is the closing parentheses for the, add event listener parameters or arguments, right? So that format probably right now looks most familiar to you from using Jasmine, right? Because when you were doing like describe blocks and it blocks, it looked a lot like this, where you were giving it a string and then you were giving it an anonymous function. It's very similar. So that's it. That's kind of the main, most common, I would say, way to do this, the syntax to set it up. All right, so I'm going to get into a really big example where we're going to practice doing a bunch of this. But before I do, I want to talk about how to put all this code together, because you're going, oh man, that was a lot. I've got all these objects I got to declare. I got to create all these listeners. How do I put it all together? There is a method to the madness. So you can add a load event listener to the window object first. And that basically just says, okay, when the window's ready for it, then execute all of this code. And then that's where you put all your code. And sometimes there might be a separate function. Launch Code likes to use init. I've used it in some of my examples as well. If you go into any of my stuff that I've got on the DOM, especially like the at least one of my graded prep graded assignment prep for number 5, I think does it this way. But you just call it from the load listener then, if you put everything else in a separate function. It kind of doesn't matter. Tonight, example I'm going to do, I'm just going to put everything inside the first initial function that's part of the listener, the load listener, so it'll all be in one place. But then however you do it, you arrange your code in a very logical order and keep it organized. So here's, and you pay attention to scope. So here's an approach I like to use. Don't have to do it this way, but I think that it makes a lot of sense and it might help you think through this. First, you would put any data that you plan to use, or maybe it's data that you fetched. And like I said, in a week and a half, you'll learn how to do that, how to get data from outside sources and then use it on your page. So you want to go and get all that data so that it's available for you to use in the rest of your code. That's number one. Then you declare objects for any elements that already exist in the page. And I say already exist because maybe part of what you're going to do is introduce new elements later on by throwing some new HTML into the page. And so it doesn't exist yet. And so you can't declare it yet because it doesn't, can't find it. But if you can, it's a good idea to declare them up top, because then they're available. They're in scope for any listeners that you've got, any code that you've got after this. And then you might say, okay, there's some content that I want to put on my page and I want it to display immediately. And maybe it needs to reference some of those objects, so that you're telling it exactly where to put it, right? Unless you're doing something like changing the title on the page, in which case you can just reference that from document, right? Document.title. But that you want to make sure that that stuff kind of all happens up here at the top. And then you want to listen for your events and, write your code that's going to interact with the user. And you can declare additional objects for elements within the listeners, as long as they don't need to be in scope for other things. So really it's just a matter of where they're needed, whether you decide to put them up at the top or just keep them inside your listener. And then of course, if you've got any utility functions that accept, parameters, they have parameters that accept arguments. you can put those anywhere. Usually you can just kind of throw them at the end to get, keep them out of the way. Okay, so let's go do this whole example that I've got here. I'm going to close these. And I'm going to open this index. So I've got a simple page, and we'll get it up here in the browser. Or there, that's fine, but I'm going to move it. Okay, and I'm done with this one. So I'm going to close this. All right, and let me get my console open and the inspector. I'm going to use both of those. All right, so here's the index. I've given it a title. I have linked my CSS like we learned how to do in the last class. And then I've also linked my script file using script with a source here. And that's all in the head. And then in the body, I've got a major div called page container that is providing some styling options for me. I use a little bit of Flexbox to make it easy to style things. And then I've got a header and I've got a main section. And inside my main section, I have this date box that has today's date, except for it's not complete, obviously. We're going to fix that. And then I've got this other section that's, go get a random number. Do you want a random button? And there's a button you can click. But right now it's not, you can click on it, but nothing happens because we have not wired it up yet with an event listener. And then this is the box where the number should be. And right now you don't see anything, right? So let's take a look at the CSS. And there's a lot of CSS here because I had a lot of fun with this, but I'm just going to point you to the things you absolutely need to see. And so here's that num box, and you can see that the visibility is hidden. So I've started out with some CSS in my external CSS file saying I want this to be hidden. Obviously, if we want the user to be able to see a number in that box, we're going to need to change that property, right? So that's going to be one of the things we do is to say, okay, now I'm ready to show this thing. So we'll change this from hidden to visible. Those are the values. Yeah, I've got a little spinning class down here that we're going to learn how to add and remove. And there's the animation stuff for that. You don't need to know how to do any of this now, but I'm having fun with this, so I did it. And then, yeah, I've got some other things about like the styling of the button and all of this. So we're going to have some fun. Okay. Here's the script. It has a whole bunch of to-dos in it because I haven't done anything yet. We're going to do it together. Okay. So here's the page. Today's date is, let's look at the first to-do. To-do number 1 is actually here. And it says, add to the existing text using a new date object and the toLocale date string method, which is going to format it for us. And again, we haven't taught you about the date object, but it's a good thing to know. So I don't mind showing it to you guys. So I need an object for this, right? And I kind of have organized this according to the structure I showed you, where I'm going to put all my objects up here at the top. So I'm actually going to declare it here. And so I'm going to say const, and I'm just going to say date. And that's going to be, so I'm going to access the document. Oh, I should have also said, notice here that I've taken window and I've added an event listener, and that event that I'm looking for is load. And then I'm giving it the anonymous function. So this bracket right here is the start of this entire function, and it ends down here. And that's the end of the event listener. Okay. So everything I'm doing is inside this load listener. I'm just doing it all in one place. But like I said, you could move some of this out and then call it from here. It's totally up to you. Okay. Let's back to the task at hand. We're going to do this date. I'm going to say document, and I could do get element by ID just for kicks. Why don't we use query selector? And I'm going to, and because I'm using query selector, I need to tell it what type of selector it is. So I'm going to use a hashtag and date, which I need to double check and make sure you're real consistent with this. I have to look and say, well, what did I actually give it? And the ID, in fact, is date. And it's this text that I'm going to update. So this is exactly what I want. I want this P right here. but I'm not concerned about it being a P. I'm more concerned about making sure it's the right paragraph. And so I'm going to use an ID so I can pinpoint it, because remember, IDs are only, they're unique to your page. You should never have two things on the page have the same ID. If you want to apply like styling to two different things the same way, that's when you use a class instead, typically. Okay, so I now have this date object. So I can come down here and it says I want to add to the existing text. So that means that, Ricky, you got a question?
Yeah, so on date equals document.query selector, is there any reason that you couldn't use like get element by ID?
I could have. They can do it either way.
Okay.
I'll use that for some of the other ones we're going to create. I just wanted to make sure you guys see the options.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, because that was something I was not super clear on when I was a student. It took me a while to kind of get my head around what's the difference between these two, which is why I came up with this over here for students when I was a TA, because I was just like, I need to actually understand how these all work differently. Okay, so yeah, see, this is something that your TAs may or may not have told you. When you're a TA, you learn a ton, because when you have to explain it to students, you have to understand it even better than you did when you were a student. Okay, so back to the code. We've got add to the text. So I'm gonna take that date object, and I can't just say, add to the object. That doesn't make sense. I need to actually say what I want to add to, and specifically I want to add to the inner HTML. So I'm going to use that plus equal operator that says take what's already there and add to it. We're concatenating. And then I'm just going to give it a new date. And if I just do it like that, it uses today's date. And then it has so many, the date object has so many methods. Lots and lots of different ways to do things. I'm going to choose toLocale time string because it's going to give me the right time, right date for my particular time zone. And it's going to, oh, but I have to actually put parentheses on it or I get this. Is function toLocale, yeah. I lost my code. It keeps jumping on me. Yes, make sure you actually put the parentheses there. And then that will format it nicely with, oh, it did that differently. Oh, I meant to do date string. That's why I'm like, what? Okay. toLocale date string is what I wanted. There it is. But you'll notice right here that I actually have no space between the two. That's the tricky thing about concatenating when you're adding values. So maybe a better way for me to do this would have been to put it inside a template literal. And so I can do like this and, let it calculate that value in a placeholder and then just put that space right there at the beginning. I would say that most of the time professionally, when I'm adding content to a page, this is how I do it with template literal, because it's so easy to read and make sure that you're creating exactly what you think you're creating. Okay, so now we come back and look at this, and sure enough, there it is. I've got the space in there and it's got today's date and it's nicely formatted. Okay, so that was to-do number 1. Now let's go to to-do number 2. This is where we get into the event listener. So we've got a page. We decided we had some content that we wanted to add right up front so that when the page loads, before the user even interacts with the page, they've got today's date displayed on there. So now we come to the part where we want to make it interactive. And, obviously the first thing is I've got click me on this button, but you can't click it. So let's add a click listener. So if I want to add a click listener to the button, then I need to be able to find the button. So we're going to need some objects, and I'm going to put it up here so that I can access it from anywhere. And I'm going to call it num button. And I'll go to document, and this time I'll use get element by ID. And that means I don't use the hashtag because I've already told it I'm giving you an ID. And I'm going to give it num button, so hyphenated. And if we go back to our index page, we can, excuse me, we can see that I have given this the ID num button. So that is the correct ID. So that should successfully have accessed that object. And I can go down and I can verify that actually at the very, very end here. And, again, we'll take a look at num button as the HTML, and then we'll use console.dir to take a look at it as an object. Okay, so you can see it both ways. So we'll come back here and there's the HTML, ID, click me, etc. And then here is the actual object that has, all the information about this thing. And of course, if we come down to the styling, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff because you're not going to see a whole bunch of stuff. I need to stop telling you that you're going to see stuff because it's all in the CSS file. I misspoke. It's all in the CSS file. And so you can't see it, but if we change it, you'll be able to see it. Okay. I don't think we're going to change anything on the button though. We're going to change some other stuff. Mitchell.
Yeah, this might be kind of outside the scope of this, but on the toLocalDate string method there, if you were to like access this page from say like a European IP address, would it change the formatting of the actual like date, for example, instead of like month?
That's an excellent question, and I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure. That's an excellent question. There are libraries out there that can do that, like super fancy stuff like that. I don't know if the built-in date object does that or not, but you could Google it. It very well might not if it was, designed by Americans, because we tend to think that we rule the world. Okay. Okay. So let's add this event list. Click event listener. So we want to add it to listen for a click on the button. That's important. So we're going to choose the object for the button that we've created, and that's what we put the listener on. And remember, I said it takes two arguments. The first one is the event name, and the second one is whatever function you want to give it. And I'm going to actually just do this in line as an anonymous function, just like that. So very similar, again, to doing Jasmine with like a describer and int block. You just are going to pass that function in as the second argument and then put your code inside it that you want to execute when the button is clicked. So we have said that we want this to generate a random number. And we also need to make the div that holds the number visible. So there's actually two things going on here. We need to come back to our index and look. Here's the button, but here's where we want this number to show up. And right now it's not visible and it just says 0. So we're actually going to want to overwrite that with a new value with some random number. And that's inside a span that has the ID random num. But the entire thing is in a box called numBox that's styled and with this class outline box. And so we want to identify both the box and the random num span so that we can change the number here with inner HTML. And then so we can make this visible so this entire thing shows up. So that's kind of two different things. So we need objects for both of those. So again, I'm going to come back up here at the top and I'm going to declare my objects. So I'm going to say numBox is document get element. Oops, I went too fast. Get element by ID and give it numBox. And then const random num document, for heaven's sake. Okay, random num. Okay. And that should be able to find both of those. So we come back to our listener here and we start executing code. I feel like there was something that I was going to do. Oh, yes, it's always a good idea to test your listeners to make sure that they actually are attached and they're firing. It really is listening. There's somebody out there. So you can just do that with a quick console log and say, I clicked the button, and you wouldn't leave this in your code professionally eventually, but for testing purposes, it's a good idea. So we come over here now and we say, okay, I've created I've identified this button. I've created a listener for it. If I click on it, I expect to see something in the console. And I do, I clicked the button and I can keep clicking on it. It's gonna just keep, putting this number up 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, over and over again. Back in the day, it used to like actually just list them over and over again. And now they do it like this. Okay. So it's working. We know that it's working. So I'm just gonna comment that out. And then we are going to actually do what we want to do. So first we'll make the box visible. Otherwise they won't be able to see it. And so that's not what I meant to do. Okay, so visibility is a style attribute. So we're gonna say numbox.style and then visibility. And then I'm gonna change that from hidden to visible. And so I just set it equal to that string visible, and that should do it. So if we come back over here and click, there's our box. It's got that 0 in it. Good, we're on the right track. So then we come back and say, random num. And this is where we're going to actually need to assign a number. I think I'm going to do this. There's some things down here that I want to do with the random number to show some other things. So I'm actually going to give it its own variable so that I can use that variable over and over again. Let's do let num equal, and then I'll do, what did I say? A number between 1 and 50, I think is what I intended to do. So we'll do this, and then math.random times 50, and then math.ceil, you might remember, rounds up. So that'll make sure that it's a number from 1 to 50 and not from 0 to 49. Okay. And then I actually did this wrong, right? Random num dot enter HTML equals. So we're going to change that from 0 to be num. All right, so let's try it. Click me, 39, 1, 36, 33. There we go. So it's working. We're getting a random number every time we click it. Great. Okay, by the way, if I had not already done this in a solution branch with lots and lots of commits, I would be committing like every time I add a new kind of to-do here. So when you're working on stuff on in your Git repository, that's something that you want to do, is make frequent commits. You get something working and it's successfully working, make a commit and then move on to the next thing. But I'm not doing that right now because I've already done it in a solution branch. Okay. I know we're a little bit over time. We'll finish this up real quick. Okay. We also want to change the color of the number to yellow-green if it's even, or coral if it's odd. So this is where you can do a little bit of logic. You can just say if, and then we'll say, if the num that we went and got, and then mod, use that modulo operator, mod 2 is equal to 0. So if the number is even, then we want random num .style.color to be equal to yellow green. Else, I get my cursor in the right place. There we go. Else random num .style.color is equal to coral. Oh my gosh, my fingers and my brain are not cooperating, guys. Okay. So let's try this out. Num is not defined. Oh, so it's not. Look what I did. Okay, so we have a scope issue. All of this, I meant to move all of these to-dos inside my listener, and I did not. So I actually need all of this to be inside the listener because that's where I've actually declared this num variable, right? Okay. Now that all of my to-dos are inside the listener, all this code should also be able to access this. Okay, so now we should be able to test it. There we go. All right, so it's green if it's even, and it's this orange color if it's not. Cool. So bonus, it says change the page background to match. And we don't even need to create any sort of object for body, because we can just get body off of document, which already exists. So let's do that. Document.body.style.background color equals yellow green. And we'll make it match. And then I can copy that down and change this one to coral. Okay, so again, we're just accessing that native object document, going to the body and then changing style and background color. And now when we click, check that out. It's changing the background. It's a little bit bright. Wow. It's not that bright on my Mac. It's brighter on this other screen. Woo. But yes, and it matches the number as we click. Okay, cool. All right. To do number 4, if the random number is evenly divisible by 3, we're going to add the spinning class. Otherwise, we're going to remove it. And this is actually, I should have been more specific. Add the spinning class to the button is what this should say. So let me, we have to go and update those instructions in the repository, but that's okay. Okay, so we've already got our button, right? Num button is our object. We need the logic though. So let's do the logic first. Okay, if num mod 3 is equal to 0, then we are going to access the class list of the button. So num button.class list. And then we'll call that happens to have this these add and remove methods. Add, and I'm going to add the class spinning that you saw in the CSS file. And then else num button dot class list remove spinning in case we've already added it. Now we want to take it off, and it doesn't hurt anything if it's not already there. It doesn't matter. It just goes and looks for it, and if it is there, it takes it off. Okay, so let's check this out and see if it works. There it is. We have a number that's a multiple of 3. So the button is spinning, and as soon as I get back to something that isn't, it takes it off. Okay, cool. Last one, trigger an alert if the number is evenly divisible by 5. Yeah, I forgot to cover this on my slides, but you could actually use the Windows alert and confirm things. And I think this is actually in your chapter. So if you did your reading, Launch Code covers this in the book. We are going to actually trigger an alert, and you can call it like window.alert, but you actually don't have to. You can just say alert. Josh, you got a question?
Yeah, sorry. It was on the last one, the class list. Did you cover that on the slide? Was that allows you to access the CSS file, or am I?
No, it just because remember, classes are added by the HTML, right?
Right.
So it's only going to be, yeah. But yes, you're right. No. Okay, so think about it this way. It's not accessing the CSS file. What it's doing is adding, like literally, where's the button? Here's the button. It's literally doing this. It's just putting this as an attribute on here. And then the HTML file can read it from the CSS.
Okay, so it's adding a class to that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty. You could, because you can do like animations and stuff that you can define in your CSS file. And then actually just add the class. And because the HTML can read from the CSS, then it can grab all of this and do something with it.
So you had the class already defined in the CSS, and then you just
Right.
told the HTML to grab it if that one is
Right.
divisible.
So it either puts this on the element or it takes it off, depending on my logic. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. It's a good question. It's definitely important to understand that. Okay, I haven't finished my logic, so it's complaining at me. Okay. Oh yeah, because I was only halfway through this. Okay. If it's divisible by 5, we are going to add an alert. So I'm just going to say alert. And then I'm going to have like a little message here. The number is a multiple of 5. And I might choose to put like some space in here, so I could use like the new line thing to make the box a little bigger and easier to read. On a Mac, they're kind of hard to read. And we can do this, but I want you to watch what's going to happen. So I'm going to keep clicking until I get to a number that's divisible by 5. It might take a second. There we go. Okay, the number is a multiple of 5, but what do you see? We still see a 7, right? So this is the trick. And this is something that you're going to run into, especially once we get into like fetching JSON and stuff. This is called a race condition, when you have two things asynchronously going and executing code. And in this case, our code is one thing that's executing synchronously, but we've just sent a command to the browser to put up an alert. So that's actually doing it at the same time. So our code is now competing against the browser code of which one's going to get it done first. So we've calculated the number and our code has said, hey, that's a number 5. And the browser said, boom, I've got an alert for you. I am super fast, but I haven't updated your page yet. So when you have a race condition, you can use this handy dandy little JavaScript thing called set timeout. And it gives you a way to set a delay. And it takes 2 arguments. The first one is the function, which is just an anonymous function like this. And I'm going to move this code. This is what I want to happen after the delay. So I put that up in there, and then I just give it the number of milliseconds. This is the second argument. So it goes right at the end. And we don't need much time. We only need 50 milliseconds. I mean, that's 1/20th of a second, but it's enough to make sure that the alert isn't going to pop up until we already see the number on the page. So now I'm going to let this refresh. There we go. And I'm going to click until I get it. And there, see how it gave us the number and then it put the alert up. Now it makes a lot more sense to the user, right? Because they're actually seeing the number that is a multiple of 5. So if you ever run up against anything like that, where things are not happening quite in the order that you planned, it can be a matter of fraction of a second, as you can see. But this can make a difference and just giving a little bit of a delay. So those are some things to watch out for. You're not going to have to do anything as tricky as that tonight with your studio. And with that, I should introduce it so that we can get you off to doing it because it's a big one. It's super fun though. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else? Nope, I just want to do studio. So let's go back to here. Okay. And that exercise, by the way, is I have the link in the slides to the GitHub. I always have, those of you who have downloaded my slides know I have a ton of slides in here that you're not seeing that are hidden, but they come out in the PDF. So there's a bunch of stuff that has like, screenshots of things and extra explanations and examples. So you'll have the links in there to the GitHub repo that has all the code for that example I just did. So you can go and you can actually get it yourself and just don't make sure that you fork all the branches, not just the main branch, because there's a solution branch in there if you want to take a look at it. Okay, Tonight Studio. You're going to fork and clone, but make sure you fork it first. The starter code from launch code that's linked in the instructions. And then you're going to make this flight simulator interactive. So here's the instructions. And they're going to walk you through the forking and cloning because they know that you're new at this Git stuff. So it's okay. They're walking you through it. And then they tell you what the requirements are, all the things that you need to put into place. Take them one at a time. Don't be overwhelmed, because kind of like I just did, you can add things just a little bit at a time. Do one thing, make sure it's working, and then move on and do the next thing. And then you can kind of refactor things if you want to, and like, oh, well, I probably could have done this differently. And then you can go back up and refactor. That's fine. But just do one thing at a time. But when you're done, you'll have this cool little flight simulator that I'm going to reset here. Okay. That has this little launch code rocket, and you can like take off and have a little alert pop up. Actually, that's a confirm, not an alert. That's the other one. You can use confirm to actually have like a yes or no that returns true or false. And I can go up and I can go down and right and left. And I can land it and, confirm it and it comes back down. Or I can, go up a ways and then abort the mission and it confirms and then it puts it back down. And then the bonus missions are things like make sure it doesn't like go off the edge of the screen. So you have to like do a little math with the number of pixels on the page. And what's the other bonus mission? Oh yeah, to return the rocket to its original position on the background anytime you like land it or abort the mission. So the first thing you're going to do is just make it possible for everything to move around. But the other thing is, notice every time I go up by 10 pixels, this is going up by 10,000 miles. So you want to make sure that that altitude is in sync with the up and down buttons as well. So you'll be doing a little bit of math and updating the element that has that value in it as well. Okay, and they give you some clues in here about about using absolute positioning. So read this, and then also this clue about using parseInt to separate out the number that's in 10 pixels from the pixel part. You can actually like go and get the value out of that string. It'll just use parseInt and it'll take off the PX and just give you the 10, and that'll help you with your math. So this is super fun. You guys work together as always and have fun. And then we'll come back here, let's say at 8:10 to do the review, and I will code it out for you guys.